first started this project, I only had a vague sense of what it was that I wanted to study. I knew I was interested in Brazil because I'd only learned about slavery from a United States point of view. From there, I chose to look into the abolition movement, and it was then that Ruy Barbosa caught my eye. The thing about him that struck me was that he was involved in a whole lot more than just the abolition movement. He was an abolitionist, a great public speaker, a diplomat, an activist, a lawyer, and a politician. My research question then became, what was Ruy's role in the abolition movement, and what is his legacy today in Brazil? Brazil abolished the African slave trade in the early 1800s, yet it was not until many years later that slavery was officially abolished. The abolitionists at the time saw slavery as not only immoral, but they were preventing growth within Brazil. Since all of the West had abolished slavery, Brazil had become a pariah. No immigrants from Europe were coming to Brazil, which meant that the industrialization of Brazil was slow, and no countries wanted to be involved in the trade. Ruy Barbosa gave his first address against slavery at the age of 19. At the time, he was in law school in Bahia. Ever since he was young, Ruy Barbosa had a way with words that his colleagues saw as really admirable. His peers were amazed at the way he could move an audience to tears one moment and laughter the next. It was this talent he had that led him to Joaquim Nabuco, who is seen here, the most well-known and most involved abolitionist in Brazil. Together, they created a duo where Joaquim was the face and the power, and Ruy Barbosa was the communicator. He was able to communicate to the public, the government, and even slave owners the abolitionist cause. With Ruy Barbosa's background in law, he had some large influence on laws that were eventually passed in Brazil to abolish slavery. Some he wrote, and they were edited and then eventually became passed, and others he wrote but were disregarded. In 1888, the Lei Áurea was passed. Finally, slavery was abolished in Brazil. But the precursor to was the Rio Branco Law, which freed any children born to slaves. The hope was that this law, which was passed in 1871, would wean slave owners off of slave use, which would then make an easier break to abolition. What I found was that Ruy Barbosa's role in Brazil did not end once slavery was over. His drive for freedom and equality transferred to other aspects of Brazilian life. He ended up becoming a diplomat, and in 1907 he represented Brazil at the Hague Conference, which became the pinnacle of his career. Shortly before World War I broke out, a conference was held in Hague with all large states and empires present. President Franklin D. Roosevelt initiated this conference, and it was there that basic rules of war were created in hopes of preventing what would later become World War I. Representing Brazil, Ruy Barbosa delivered a speech which earned him the name Eagle of the Hague because of his ferocity. Here he stood up for Brazil and all of South America, demanding that small states deserve the same respect, attention, and treatment as large and powerful states. This took place after Brazil abolished slavery, yet Brazil was still being treated by other international powers as a pariah. His goal was to get Brazil and South America more involved in international affairs, something that he hoped would help all those states become more developed. After his presence there, he became an icon for all of South America, and furthermore, he was responsible for putting Brazil on the map. After Ruy's success at The Hague, he soon began campaigning for the presidency. In the time after the Lei Áurea had been written and passed, Brazil had begun holding elections, which was a step towards a fair democracy. Ruy Barbosa further changed Brazilian elections when he ran as the first civilian against the military candidate Marshal Henry de Fonseca. De Fonseca was the nephew of the first Brazilian president, a man who was also a military leader. Unfortunately, Ruy Barbosa did not win the election, and to this day it is believed that those elections were rigged. This political cartoon depicts that belief. It is the burial of Ruy Barbosa's civilian campaign. Barbosa's loss did not change Brazilians' perspective of him. Although Henry de Fonseca's presidency did not create the changes that Barbosa wanted to see in Brazil, Barbosa's impact was still great. Today, he is remembered as an important Brazilian figure. His name has been taught to all the young Brazilians in school, and his home has been turned into an international law library. He has been compared to George Washington and Abe Lincoln of the United States for being that important of a figure in the country's history. That compares him to how great his legacy is to those of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Today he is remembered as a leader as well as a man who valued equality and freedom for all.